Chapter 3, America and China. 1. The Rivals. Part 2. On the other hand, since American culture was wholly concerned with the values of the individual life, it was more sensitive than the Chinese with regard to the well-being of humble individuals. Therefore, industrial conditions were far better under American than under Chinese capitalism, and in China both kinds of capitalism existed side by side. There were American factories in which the Chinese operatives thrived on the American system, and there were Chinese factories in which the operatives were, by comparison, abject wage slaves. The fact that many Chinese industrial workers could not afford to keep a motor car, let alone an aeroplane, was a source of much self-righteous indignation among American employers. And the fact that this did not cause a revolution in China, and that Chinese employers were able to procure plenty of labour in spite of the better conditions in American factories, was a source of perplexity. But in truth, what the average Chinese worker wanted was not symbolical self-assertion through the control of privately owned machines, but security of life and irresponsible leisure. In the earlier phase of modern China, there had indeed been serious explosions of class hatred. Almost every one of the great Chinese industrial centres had, at some point in its career, massacred its employers and declared itself an independent communist city-state. But communism was alien to China, and none of these experiments was permanently successful. Latterly, when the rule of the Nationalist Party had become secure, and the worst industrial evils had been abolished, class feeling had given place to a patriotic loathing of American interference and American hustle, and those who worked under American employers were often called traitors. The Nationalist Party was not indeed the soul of China, but it was, so to speak, the central nervous system within which the soul presided as a controlling principle. The party was an intensely practical yet idealistic organisation, half civil service, half religious order, though violently opposed to every kind of religion. Modelled originally on the Bolshevik Party of Russia, it had also drawn inspiration from the native and literary civil service of old China, and even from the tradition of administrative integrity which had been the sole contribution of British imperialism to the East. Thus, by a route of its own, the party had approached the ideal of the Platonic governors. In order to be admitted to the party, it was necessary to do two things: to pass a very strict written examination on Western and Chinese social theory, and to come through a 5 years apprenticeship in actual administrative work. Outside the party, China was still extremely corrupt, for peculation and nepotism were not censured, so long as they were kept decently hidden. But the party set a brilliant example of self-oblivious devotion, and this unheard-of honesty was one source of its power. It was universally recognised that the party man was genuinely interested in social rather than private matters, and consequently he was trusted. The supreme object of his loyalty was not the party, but China, not indeed the mass of Chinese individuals whom he regarded with almost the same nonchalance as he regarded himself, but the corporate unity and culture of the race. The whole executive power in China was now in the hands of members of the party, and the final legislative authority was the assembly of party delegates. Between these two institutions stood the president, sometimes no more than chairman of the executive committee. This individual was now and then almost a dictator, combining in himself the attributes of prime minister, emperor, and pope. For the head of the party was the head of the state, and like the ancient emperors, he became the symbolical object of ancestor worship. The party's policy was dominated by the Chinese respect for culture, just as Western states had been all too often organised under the will for military prestige. So the new China was organised under the will for prestige of culture. For this end, the American state was reviled as the supreme example of barbarian vulgarity, and so patriotism was drawn in to strengthen the cultural policy of the party. It was boasted that, while indeed in America every man and woman might hope to fight a way to material wealth, in China every intelligent person could actually enjoy the cultural wealth of the race. The economic policy of the party was based on the principle of affording to all workers security of livelihood and full educational opportunity. In American eyes, however, the livelihood thus secured was scarcely fit for beasts, and the education provided was out of date and irreligious. The party took good care to gather into itself all the best of every social class, and also to encourage in the unintelligent masses a respect for learning and the illusion that they themselves shared to some extent in the national culture. But in truth, this culture, which the common people so venerated in their superiors and mimicked in their own lives, was scarcely less superficial than the cult of power against which it was pitted. For it was almost wholly a cult of social rectitude and textual learning, not so much of the merely literary learning which had obsessed ancient China, as of the vast corpus of contemporary scientific dogma and, above all, of pure mathematics. In old days, the candidate for office had to show minute but uncritical knowledge of classical writers. Now he had to give proof of a no less barren agility in describing the established formula of physics, biology, psychology, and more particularly of economics and social theory. And though never encouraged to puzzle over the philosophical basis of mathematics, he was expected to be familiar with the intricacy of at least one branch of that vast game of skill. So great was the mass of information forced upon the student that he had no time to think of the mutual implications of the various branches of his knowledge. Yet there was a soul in China, and in this elusive soul of China the one hope of the first men now lay. Scattered throughout the party was a minority of original minds who were its source of inspiration and the growing point of the human spirit in this period. Well aware of man's littleness, these thinkers regarded him nonetheless as the crown of the universe. On the basis of a positivistic and rather perfunctory metaphysic, they built a social ideal and a theory of art. Indeed, in the practice and appreciation of art they saw man's highest achievement. Pessimistic about the remote future of the race and contemptuous of American evangelism, they accepted as the end of living the creation of an intricately unified pattern of human lives set in a fair environment. Society, the supreme work of art, so they put it, is a delicate and perishable texture of human intercourse. They even entertained the possibility that, in the last resort, not only the individual's life, but the whole career of the race might be tragic, and to be valued according to the standards of tragic art. Contrasting their own spirit with that of the Americans, one of them had said, "America, a backward youth in a playroom equipped with luxury and electric power, pretends that his mechanical toy moves the world. China, a gentleman walking in his garden in the evening, admires the fragrance and the order all the more, because in the air is the first nip of winter, and in his ear rumour of the irresistible barbarian." In this attitude there was something admirable and sorely needed at this time, but also there was a fatal deficiency. In its best exponents it rose to a detached yet fervent salutation of existence, but all too easily degenerated into a supine complacency and a cult of social etiquette. In fact, it was ever in danger of corruption through the inveterate Chinese habit of caring only for appearances. In some respects, the spirit of America and the spirit of China were complementary, since the one was restless and the other bland, the one zealous and the other dispassionate, the one religious, the other artistic, the one superficially mystical, or at least romantic, the other classical and rationalistic, though too easy-going for prolonged, rigorous thought. Had they cooperated, these two mentalities might have achieved much. On the other hand, in both there was an identical and all-important lack. Neither of them was disturbed and enlightened by that insatiable lust for the truth, that passion for the free exercise of critical intelligence, the gruelling hunt for reality, which had been the glory of Europe and even of the earlier America, but now was no longer anywhere among the first men. And consequent on this lack, another disability crippled them. Both were by now without that irreverent wit which individuals of an earlier generation had loved to exercise upon one another and on themselves, and even on their most sacred values. In spite of this weakness, with good luck, they might have triumphed, but, as I shall tell, the spirit of America undermined the integrity of China, and thereby destroyed its one chance of salvation. There befell, in fact, one of those disasters, half inevitable and half accidental, which periodically descended on the first men, as though by the express will of some divinity who cared more for the excellence of his dramatic creation than for the sentient puppets which he had conceived for its enacting.